G'day Jafffa Adventures, Terry King here. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about two subjects: MAP sensors, manifold absolute pressure, and MAF sensors, mass airflow sensors. On your Landcruiser 200, it has one of each. Your MAF sensor is located here on your standard airbox, and your MAP sensor is located at the back of the intercooler. Believe it or not, you can service those two sensors. You want to see how to do that? Stick around. Okay, to get to our MAP sensor, we've actually got to pull the intercooler off. And to pull the intercooler off, the first thing we've got to do is get this cover off. It's held in place with two 10mm cap nuts. This cover then just lifts up and pulls towards you. And voila, off it comes. Start off with, we got to pull these two inlet air tubes off. They're just held on with a 10mm hose clamp. All right, both hose clamps off. Now there are 4 bolts holding the intercooler down, 4 mounting bolts, 2 here on the front, which are a breeze to get to. Now to get to the mounting bolts for the intercooler on the back, you got to get this little sucker out of the way. And it's got 2 10mm bolts holding it on. And there's number 2. Got him. Now you can see that bolt is exposed. All right, that sucker's a 12mm. And of course it tightens up right at the end of its stroke, doesn't it? All right, that bolt's 20 miles long. And we got one more on the other side. Got him. Okay, now we got to take the bolts off that run into the inlet manifold. There's 2 on this inlet pipe, and there's 2 on the inlet pipe on the other side. You'll need a socket with a wobble on it to get them. There's one of the little boogers. There's the other one. So that's the left-hand side. Now the right-hand side is actually a little bit easier to get to. There's one. There's number 2. Now that intercooler is basically ready to come off. What I've got to do is get these hoses off. I've already got the hose clamps off, so I just got to pry the hose off. And then once we get these hoses off, we're going to shift it forward only a couple of inches, and there's a couple of plugs at the back of the intercooler we've got to take off. All right, there's one hose. Now, this one's a bit trickier to get to because we've got other hoses in the road. Okay, there we go. Okay, we'll pull the intercooler forward just a little bit. I'm gonna lift it up off those studs. There we go. Now I've got 2 plugs and 1 hose to get off. I'm gonna start with that plug there, which is our air temperature sensor. Okay, I got those 2 plugs off and the 1 hose off, but it was not easy. You need little teeny tiny hands to get back there. But once I get this intercooler out of the road, I'll show you exactly what we're after. So this is the back of the intercooler. This is the top face. That's the charge air temperature sensor. That there is the MAP sensor. And on the bottom of the MAP sensor is this little plug here where a hose sticks onto. On the back here, that's our MAP sensor plug. That's our inlet air temperature sensor plug, and that's our little hose that goes onto the MAP sensor. Now to service our MAP sensor, this little guy is what we're after. Got him. And that's him there. He's a little tiny filter. And there's the hose that goes around onto the bottom of that filter. Okay, so there's our little MAP sensor filter. Here's my replacement. It is identical. AISIN, ASEAN. And there's the Toyota part number that you're chasing, 90917-11036. So first things first, we'll take this hose off of that here. Pop that hose on there. I'm going to get these two earth clamps out of the road so that I can get that hose on that filter a little bit easier. All right, that's better. Okay, we got them popped in place. Now let's get our earth clamps back on. All right, that's got him. Okay, our MAP sensor filter is back in place. Now that little pipe plugs up into the back of the intercooler, and if you ever lose power, it's highly likely that that has come off of the MAP sensor on the intercooler and you're bleeding boost out through that MAP sensor. All right, I'm going to cut this old one open because I'd like to see what's actually inside of this thing. All right, what do we got? We got a lid with a hole. And we got a little bit of gauze mesh material, and that is it. And that gauze mesh material in mine looks a little bit discolored. Let's see if I can dig it out of there. There we go. Red dust. What do you know? Well, that's it. That's all that little filter is. It's got a little paper element that's designed to trap dust. And obviously, if it didn't have that, that dust would make it into the MAP sensor, and it might actually foul that MAP sensor up. So there you go. That's what's inside these little suckers. Cool. This is a diagram of a typical MAP sensor. What we've got here is our filter. That's an external filter on our Landcruiser 200. And the way these little suckers work is there's a vacuum chamber here which is closed. And this little semiconductor unit measures the pressure differential between the manifold, which is coming in here through the filter, and between this vacuum chamber. It converts that into an electrical signal and sends that to the ECU. The vehicle will then manage the amount of fuel it sends into the combustion chamber based on that manifold absolute pressure. There's two main areas where the MAP sensors can fail. One is a leak in that diaphragm, and number two is this filter blocking up, which we changed. And if that filter is blocked up, then it cannot read the manifold pressure. In either case, in your 200 series, it'll throw a trouble code, and it'll probably be this P0069, MAP sensor too high or too low. The main difference between the MAP sensor and the MAF sensor, which we'll go into shortly, is that the MAP sensor measures air density and makes changes to fueling of the engine based on that air density. The MAF sensor measures air flow. So if your vehicle throws this P0069 trouble code, the first place I would be looking is that little filter that we've changed and see whether that's blocked up. Because these MAP sensors, they don't fail that often. They're a pretty robust unit. Now in terms of actually servicing or cleaning this MAP sensor, there's nothing more you need to do other than replace that filter we just looked at. So this intercooler can now go back on the car. All right. Now the trickiest bit by far is getting that little tiny hose on the MAP sensor. You can get your hand in there, but it's not easy, especially if you've got big fat claws like I do. And when you're done, you're probably going to be all carved up like I am as well. But it is possible, just keep at it. Installation is just a reversal of the removal process. You guys have already done this. You've already pulled it off. You're smart people, so you know what needs to be done to put it back together. For that reason, I'm not going to provide a step-by-step instructions. Well, after about 10 minutes of grunting and groaning, we got there. Intercooler back in place. Now let's get to servicing this MAF. This is obviously the factory Toyota box. You can remove that MAF by getting a stubby screwdriver in there and drawing it out that way, but it's a pain in the butt. These are very short little screws, and I've been prone to drop them. So what I do is I end up taking this entire lid off. And to do that, we'll release the MAF sensor cable out of here, disconnect the MAF sensor connector. There's a little detent on the back of the plug. You press that detent in and you pull it out. There's the detent there. I'm now going to loosen this clamp on the air intake. That'll allow me to draw this entire lid off, and I'll undo all 4 clips on the lid of this intake box. Once that's done, I can pull the lid up and I can draw the lid out of that intake tube. Now here's something I'd like to draw your attention to. I've got a uni filter installed in this car and have done for years now. The lid of this intake box has never been cleaned. And if you have a look at that, There is absolutely no evidence of any dust anywhere whatsoever. Also, if you have a look at the seam here on the box where the unifilter's been sitting, you can see that oily residue. You can see a lot of dust here on the outside. There is nothing getting past the seam. This vehicle has just come back from a double Simpson Desert crossing. There's 5,000 kilometers on this intake system since I serviced it, and it is in absolutely pristine condition. Also, have a look in that intake pipe. There is no evidence whatsoever of any dust. Now, I don't care what filter mechanism you use in your car, but I would strongly suggest if you're using the Toyota factory box and Toyota factory air filters, and if your car sees any off-road work or any dirt roads at all, I'd be swapping that system out. It is absolutely known for dusting motors. And look back and think about all the cars and all the manufacturers across the years, near on 100 years now. How many times have you heard about a dusted motor because of an air filtration system? It does not happen often, but it is absolutely an issue with these Toyota 200s, so be very, very wary of that. If you're buying one of these cars and it's got the factory intake system, pull that sucker off, have a look down that tube, have a look in the lid. You want to make damn sure that there's no dust residue anywhere. If there is, run for the hills. Now to remove this MAF sensor, you just undo these two screws. And you can tell whether your MAF sensor's been out before if those heads of those screws are chewed up or at all or not. Once you've done that, you draw the MAF sensor out of the airbox. Now, if you do have an oil element filter like mine, and you're a little bit aggressive on the oiling side of it, you might get a little bit of oil past that filter and start to stick to this MAF sensor. If that's the case, that can obviously muck up the readings on this sensor. So that's something that you should just be aware of. My experience is if you oil that filter appropriately, you don't have any dramas. So let's talk about how a mass airflow sensor works. Inside of this MAF sensor, you've got two wires. You've got a hot wire and a thermistor. The thermistor, or thermal resistor, that simply measures inlet air temperature. So this sensor actually records two things, your inlet air temperature and the airflow through your intake system. Now the way it measures the airflow through the intake system is this little wire has a current going through it and it's kept at a steady temperature. If you push the throttle down, more air will flow over top of that little hot wire. It'll drop the temperature of the hot wire. That'll drop its resistance, which means more current flows through the wire to keep the temperature up. And there's a direct correlation between the amount of current flowing through that wire and the amount of air passing over top of it. And that's how the MAF sensor measures the amount of air flowing into your intake system. In the case of the Toyota units, this MAF sensor is also used for the ECU to determine shift points in the automatic transmission. And we all know how accurate and useful those shift points are in the 200 series 6-speed, far out. Now these MAF sensors can fail. These little wires here are very prone to contamination getting stuck on them, and that'll change the resistance properties of the wires. And these little wires can break, and if they break, obviously the sensor fails. If that does happen, there's a whole host of trouble codes that can be thrown. This P0100 all the way through to 103 are all related to mass airflow sensor problems. If you do get a MAF trouble code thrown, the first thing that I would do is clean these MAF sensors. If cleaning doesn't work, you can compare the output readings of your MAF sensor to the specifications, and you can do that through Toyota TechStream. But if it were me and my MAF sensor shat itself, I'd just simply save myself the heartache and grief and replace the sensor. Now inside that MAF sensor, and it'd probably be very difficult to see with this camera, are the hot wires and the thermistor sitting inside of there. We'll end up cleaning the entire sensor, but that's the area you want to make sure that you really get right. Now to clean these little suckers, I've just got a can of MAF sensor cleaner, and you just simply spray the sensor down. I'm spraying the exterior body, but the part that you really want to concentrate on is that little bit in there. You want to make sure if there's any oily residue or any dirt particles on that hot wire or the thermistor that you get them off. Now I'm just blowing this dry with a bit of compressed air, and I'm not going crazy. This sucker's rated at 100 psi, and I've just got the trigger barely squeezed. These wires are used to air passing over them, but not air coming out of the end of a nozzle at 100 psi. This is probably just a little bit more than what you would be able to blow out of your mouth. And that's it. That MAF sensor is cleaned, and that's ready to be reinstalled. You might be able to see the thermistor and the hot wires a little bit easier now that I'm out here in the sunshine. Now when you go to reinstall this MAF sensor, it's idiot proof. You can't put it in the wrong way, because if you do, the holes don't line up on the screws. So you just slide them back in place, and you do up those two screws. If you want, you can lubricate up that O-ring that sits around the inside of that sensor. Mine's in pretty good nick at the moment, so I'm not going to do that. That's it. We're going to install that airbox lid back in the car. MAF sensor done. Well, there you have it, Jafffa Adventures. Everything you wanted to know and never needed to know about MAP and MAF sensors. I trust it got the brain juices flowing a little bit. We've got some more tech videos heading your way. Hit subscribe if that sounds like it's something of interest to you. If not, continue to look after one and keep the shiny side up. Bye now.